Here it is in all its beauty and diversity. Wait, oh no! I dropped it. It's broken now. I mean, that's not too big of a surprise. It was always the most broken economy on Earth. What do you mean by broken? Well, just so no one gets mad at me in the comments, I mean broken by South Africa having the highest statistical inequality out of any country on Earth.
I'm not sure if anyone is surprised. I mean, apartheid is still, still in recent history, bro. I mean, I'm pretty sure most of you watching, based off my age demographics, were alive when South Africa was South Africa. Guys, you get what I mean here? And there are a lot of people still moving around that are millennials. You understand? that are still suffering from that time, at least mentally, maybe, guys. I mean, obviously things have obviously changed there, but that did not just instantly there was no great transfer of wealth in South Africa. So all the people that had all those years to basically accumulate things off the backs of other people, they still have that. The majority of them, at least, guys. So yeah, income inequality in South Africa is absolutely not a surprising thing, guys.
At least according to Gini's coefficient. It is so unequal that the richest 10% of South Africans own around 80 to 85% of the country's wealth. And that's generally not good for a country. But come on, guys. The US also has a high inequality, and it's still one of the richest countries on the planet. So let's zoom out to get a broader view of South Africa's overall economy. GDP stagnating since 2010. GDP per capita has fallen since then too. Hunger is rising. Inflation is actually fairly low, but we should expect that when unemployment is extremely high. And of course, the massive inequality does no justice. Over half of their exports are dirty materials. Well, not dirty, I mean, but from the dirt. Raw minerals and ores, which generally need highly expensive equipment, low-skilled labor, and are dependent on ore prices to sell. Places which are reliant on mining usually have high unemployment rates, like their neighbor Botswana, West Virginia usually, and northern Canada, leading to a youth unemployment rate of 66%. Wait, that's 2/3 of all young people. That seems ridiculously high even for mining standards. There has to be some other reason, and there definitely is. South Africa is a dual economy. It's basically two different countries in one. Sounds great, right? Double the product and double the money, baby. Except not. One of their economies is quite rich, monopolizing in fact, owning pretty much all the mining, all the infrastructure, all the capital, and all the wealth. Okay, half of that was about the government and their corrupt state-owned enterprises, and the other half was about the urban, rich, white population. The other half, or about 80% of South Africa, is much, much poorer, struggling to...
Guys, keep in mind that it's not that all of the white people in South Africa are wealthy, because that's absolutely not the case, guys. There are a lot of like almost like white-only ghettos in South Africa, guys. Keep this in mind, all right? But let's continue.
Or about 80% of South Africa is much, much poorer, struggling to access basic housing, water, electricity, education, and stable jobs. It's mainly made of black South Africans who earn on average 3 times less than white South Africans. So how did South Africa even get like this? And what is it doing to the Rainbow Nation? Long story short, South Africa did not develop as a native entity. It was a colonial project. It was originally colonized by the Dutch, who were then invaded by the British and pushed over here. Then the British smelled diamonds and minerals and invaded again during the Boer War, all while the natives watched them fight over their land. This new South Africa under the British, all while the natives watched them...
She is tribally Khoisan.
Fight over their land.
And she would have been from the east.
This new South Africa under the British was usually accompanied by a power struggle.
And the Khoisan are super interesting people, guys. I think like everyone on Earth can probably trace something back to the Khoisan, right? About 150,000 years old, tribally, and they share everyone's DNA, basically. Super interesting, guys. Definitely go ahead and check those people out, guys.
Their land. This new South Africa under the British was usually accompanied by a power struggle between the Brits and Boers, but there was one thing they could agree on. There was no way they would let the native Africans take away their God-given right to this land. At least Cecil Rhodes thought it was God-given. They enacted the Native Lands Act in 1913, which gave the Europeans around 92% of the land, despite only being a fifth of...
And obviously minus Djibouti, guys.
of the population to remove the competition around farming and create a pool of low-skilled, low-wage laborers. And in 1936, they reinforced this with another Land Act. But come on, guys, they had a little bit of heart in them. This time they went from giving the natives 7% of the land to now 13% of it.
Wow.
This power struggle, if you could even call it that, it was pretty one-sided, lasted until the 1940s when it got worse. In 1948, the Afrikaner National Party took power and their new president, Daniel F. Malin, said, "We need to have apartness." Except he said in Afrikaans.
Ons moet apartheid hê.
Do you see that word in the middle? Apartheid. There's the missing clue to why South Africa is so unequal today. Apartheid was...
Bro, really? But does this sign say caution, beware of natives? Oh my God. Oh my God. Well, I guess it's no worse than what we had, guys. But the problem is that this was much more recent, right? I mean, again, there are people alive. There are thousands, millions of people alive, guys.
It was a terrible series of acts which was used to essentially make two different countries split based on race. Let's go through some acts. The Population Registration Act made everyone register to their racial group. They made 4 of them that everyone was sorted into: white, colored, Indian, and Bantu. The Group Areas Act created separate physical spaces for these groups. The Prohibition of Mixed Marriages Act and Separate Representation of Voters Act, well, those ones are pretty self-explanatory.
Right.
Some of the worst acts were the
Sounds like Mississippi right now.
Bantu Education Act, which created poorly funded state-run schools for black South Africans, generally used to teach skills for cheap manual labor, and banned non-whites from universities. Enforcing the Lands Act to give the minority the majority of it again, and the Promotion of Bantu Self-Government Act, which created certain Bantu stands that...
Oh, bro, what was I thinking about, bro? This is definitely not Djibouti, bro. I'm thinking, apologies, it's not Djibouti. All right, let's continue.
Each black South
Djibouti's
African was assigned
northeast.
to, even if they weren't from there, of which they would be a citizen of and not a citizen of South Africa. These acts worked wonders to hold back the majority of South Africans from developing and keeping them in poverty. But let's break from the acts and go to the ad instead. Thanks to Incognito for sponsoring this video. Do you want to fight the man? Not that man. We'll see he didn't last long after all. This one, or more like the black and white nation at this point. How did they even get out of that phase? Apartheid was just a pretty racial time in general, banning the majority of South Africans from skilled jobs, education, owning property, public areas, and certain laws and securities. The apartheid economy was based on blocking entry so only the white South Africans benefited, dominating using the white-owned police, government, military, and businesses. Oh, and also high gold, diamond, and metal prices. Yeah, they needed those to stay dominating. Not really a shocker when the general economy started to stagnate by the late 70s then. When it did, then came the riots. Well, there are always riots and strikes like the 1960 Sharpeville Massacre, but I mean the riots. Capital R. Starting with the Soweto uprising and gradually getting more and more organized. Some white politicians called for petty apartheid, and the UN got more vocal about potentially ending apartheid by now. Pfft, the government didn't care. Then the UN led an embargo on arms to South Africa. Pfft, who cares again? But then in 1985, the US, UK, and UN placed sanctions on South Africa. Tch, who cares? Sanctions on white things like computer manufacturing, steelwork, and loans given to the government, along with capital flight from hundreds of companies pulling out of the nation. What?
Right.
The perfect storm of recession brought by these sanctions and the Cold War ending made the government a lot more sympathetic to the Soviet-aligned African National Congress, who led the main opposition to apartheid. This sparsely populated part called Southwest Africa was set free in 1990, now called Namibia. The ANC leader who was jailed, Nelson Mandela, was also set free. Most apartheid laws were repealed. Then a referendum asked the people if they agreed with it. They said yes, and in 1994, everyone was given the right to vote, a new constitution was made, a new flag was made, and Nelson became their first black president, and they all lived happily ever after. Wait. No, they didn't.
No.
South Africa is still very much broken. If apartheid's goal was to create two...
Guys, keep in mind, all of these people that benefited from this year are still alive, and for the most part, still very well off, guys. So yeah, of course they're gonna have two economies, and yes, absolutely, their economy would be broken, guys. It's Yeah.
Two different South African societies and economies, it's definitely succeeded. But because it succeeded, the modern country has suffered immensely, and it means our story isn't quite over yet. Enough history. Let's talk about right now. Apartheid creating awful inequality is one part of the South African puzzle, but there's still another very important part we're missing. The ANC. Ever since their first win in 1994, they've won every single election since. Not just that, they've won a majority government and the majority of votes every single time in almost all provinces, although slowly are falling off recently.
Okay, so basically what they did was they created some type of royal family, royal party, let's say. That's not a good thing.
For 30 years, South Africa has essentially been a one-party state.
Right.
But have they got complacent because of that?
Absolutely.
Likely.
Right.
They have one major weakness, and it isn't just these fashionistas heckling them in parliament. Their weakness is corruption, at least tolerating corruption. Despite early attempts to institute anti-corruption measures by Mandela, Mbeki, and then by Ramaphosa, it has always perpetuated itself in South Africa, especially within the ANC SOEs, that's state-owned enterprises. Historically, these were government-run companies used to
Guys, where there's money, there's corruption.
consolidate the white minority's power and wealth, and non-historically, they've done the exact same thing for the ANC elite. Whether they're mining or infrastructure, there's usually a healthy amount of corruption in them. You know, things like diverting the funds going to poor communities' water and electricity to their pockets, not properly maintaining their sites, firing well-trained technical leaders and replacing them with an incompetent family or tribal member, most public and private companies taking bribes, and government officials stealing public funds meant to go to Nelson Mandela's funeral, man. His funeral! That's just disrespect. Then there's the face of corruption in South Africa, Jacob Zuma, president from 2009 to 2018 and inmate from 2021 to 2022, charged with receiving bribes for an arms deal and accused of state looting, profiteering from the wealthy Gupta family, and 18 other counts of corruption. So now, massive inequality and a generally corrupt ruling party has led to a whole plethora of issues. Let's go through some, shall we?
Let's go.
Electricity. South Africa, once praised for being the most industrialized country in Africa, is struggling to keep its lights on. Guess who owns the one electricity company in the country?
The government.
Yeah, it's the ANC. They call it Eskom. It's hindered by corruption, incompetent leaders not maintaining their plants, and lack of investment into new power plants has led to power demand far, far surpassing power supply. And now they have to run the grid at 50% capacity. For the average South African, that usually means, oh my lord, the power's back. Thank God. As I was saying, for South Africans, that means daily planned power outages, or load shedding, as they say.
Also, at the same time, probably extremely expensive electricity.
It's not that bad, guys. It's
It's bad, bro. It's that bad.
usually around 2 hours a day, but in some parts they shut off the lights for 12 hours a day. I don't know how much mining or manufacturing or call centering or office computing you could do without electricity. So since their electricity per capita graph has stagnated since '07, so has their product per capita. Doesn't help that South Africa gets 70% of its power from coal, one of the least efficient and dirtiest ways to get it. But investment into some renewables, foreign investment, and some cities privatizing show signs of hope in like a decade when these new plants can actually be made. Infrastructure. Electricity isn't the only public works project failing. Everything else is too. We also got roads, rail, water, schools, hospitals, damn, even ports. I mean, their biggest export destination was Tambo Airport, not a much cheaper seaport. Their civil engineering organization even gave them the lowest infrastructure rating ever recorded in 2022, with hospitals, schools, paved roads, and water supplies at risk of failure, and railways, unpaved roads, and sanitation unfit for use. Buzzkills. Whether it affects their ability to import and export goods they need or having constant halts on their rail lines, they just can't move their things about. And they can't move their water about either. About 25 to 30% of their entire water supply is lost from leaks in their pipes alone, not even including the droughts they constantly face sitting in a fairly arid region. Many cities lack access to running water, usually having a communal tap. Actually, only around 45% of houses do have a tap. The average dam is only filled up around 15% of the way, and poor planning once limited Cape Townians to only 50 liters of water a day. They never hit their day zero, the day they would run out of water, but they got scarily close. Crime. That's enough about corruption.
Guys, what's crazy is when I went to South Africa, I didn't experience any of these things, guys. So I don't know if this is like super new. When I went, it was like 19 years. So like 2018. And I was just like, bro, beautiful place. I mean, the water is great. Everything is nice. The mountains are dope, guys, right? But I didn't experience any of these things. Maybe it's just like they don't shut down the hotels or something.
Let's get back to this apartheid-driven inequality instead. From that, collapsing infrastructure, poverty, and chronic unemployment, there has been a steady rise in crime and violence in South Africa.
Of course.
Crime saw a 24% increase in 2022, the largest it has ever been. So let's get some sad stats out the way. South Africa has the third highest crime rate, top 10 homicide rate, number 1 burglary rate, and number 1 rate of, as Jacob Zuma can attest.
Bro, why would you say that word?
To. Yikes. Pretoria, Durban, and Johannesburg are all top 5 cities by crime rate. Recently, there has also been the lowest young voters sign up and turnout in South African history, besides the whole ban from voting thing.
Yeah, so basically, with everything that they're experiencing, they're like, I don't really care anymore. That's basically what it sounds like. Sounds like a failed state. Guys.
Is this a sign that young people are no longer seeing democratic ways to fix their issues?
Right.
All of these have led to widespread emigration, some riots, and a friend of mine actually telling me how it's funny that the Zulu and Xhosa might even go to war. It's the unfortunate
Well, bro, what are you talking about?
human condition.
We don't want the Zulu messing with nobody, bro.
Whenever times get tough, the guns come out. Just reminds me of those gangs that live next door to all of us. Segregation. Even though segregation formally ended over 30 years ago, many cities in South Africa are still in effect segregated. Many of these are from huge influxes of mainly black people who were forced to live in Bantustans coming to the cities after apartheid. But they didn't have the resources to live in the urban centers or suburbs, being forced to live in the outskirts, often called shanty towns. These makeshift towns were not built with proper planning for water and electricity services in mind, many not even having access today. Oftentimes, business centers were also not even allowed to set up in the majority black areas, so poverty is endemic. Some of the more famous shanty towns like Soweto make up only around 10% of Johannesburg's total area but host nearly 40% of its population. Meanwhile, when we virtually drive in J-Town suburbs, we can see extravagant fenced housing with beautiful courtyards. Yes, these two are the same city. And out in the countryside, it's not much better. Hopefully they don't go full Robert Mugabe, stealing land from farmers and destroying their food supply, killing the nation.
Relax.
That's what happened to Zimbabwe.
Right.
But before I end this video, since this
And their ridiculous currency.
one was so negative, let me say 3 nice things about South Africa.
Okay, please.
They have a beautiful landscape.
They do.
Didn't have a race war to end apartheid. Congrats. And they made Noel Dizel. Welcome to South Africa.
I don't know who that last guy is, but listen, I learned a whole lot of things. I didn't expect for it to be as, definitely a negative video. He's right? But luckily he ended with something that was not so, but still, okay. Guys, I don't know how you can fix this. It sounds like the state is just failing. That's what it feels like, a failed state, guys. Maybe check out Dar es Salaam, guys. Go ahead and check that out. East Africa. All right, listen. You guys all have an absolutely amazing day. Enjoy your day thoroughly.